Jack Miller had never imagined that his smartass attitude would land him in an interstellar marriage crisis. Yet here he was, on the distant world of Kriltax Prime, where the gravity was just slightly off-putting, the air smelled vaguely of cinnamon, and the locals had an unsettling number of teeth. Remember, Miller, this diplomatic mission is crucial for Earth's standing in the Galactic Alliance, Admiral Thompson had told him before departure. What the Admiral had conveniently failed to mention was that the Kriltax were essentially 8-foot-tall humanoid praying mantises with anger management issues and a cultural obsession with pointy objects. Jack adjusted his uncomfortable formal uniform as he stood at the viewport of the Earth Embassy, a prefabricated structure that looked pathetically small beside the towering obsidian spires of the Kriltax capital city. The two moons overhead cast an eerie purple glow across the landscape. "Enjoying the view, or planning your escape route?" came a voice from behind him. Jack turned to see Lisa Okonkwo, the actual qualified diplomat on this mission, approaching with a datapad. "Both," Jack replied, scratching his 2-day stubble. "I still don't understand why you needed a cultural liaison when we have actual diplomats. I'm just a linguistic anthropologist who made the mistake of publishing one paper on Kriltax battle poetry." Lisa's expression suggested there was more to the story. The Kriltax specifically requested someone who understood their warrior traditions. "Your paper was impressive to them." "My paper was called Rhythmic Violence, the intersection of bloodlust and meter in Kriltax war chants. It was meant to be mildly satirical." "Well, they didn't pick up on the satire," Lisa said, handing him the datapad. "Here's your briefing for today's meeting with Commander Vextra and her war council. Please try not to make any jokes about their exoskeletons or mandibles." Jack skimmed the information with growing unease. Commander Vextra was apparently one of the most decorated warriors in Kriltax history, with over 40 confirmed kills in ritual combat, and a reputation for eating the hearts of her enemies. Not metaphorically, actually eating them. "Great," Jack muttered. "So I'll be meeting Space Hannibal Lecter, except she's legally allowed to disembowel me if I use the wrong fork." Lisa didn't laugh. "This isn't a joke, Jack. The Kriltax have resources Earth desperately needs, and they respect two things: strength and tradition. You somehow impressed them with your understanding of their culture, so please, for the love of humanity, take this seriously." Jack gave a mock salute. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be on my best behavior." But as the transport shuttle carried them toward the towering spire of negotiation, which given the Kriltax's history, was probably better translated as spire of deciding how to kill you, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this mission was already doomed. The shuttle landed with a soft thud on a platform jutting from the obsidian tower. As the doors hissed open, Jack was immediately hit by the planet's warm spice-scented air and the distinct sound of chittering, hundreds of Kriltax warriors lining the path to the entrance, their exoskeletons gleaming in the alien sunlight. "Remember," Lisa whispered as they stepped out, "Commander Vextra is a traditionalist. Whatever you do, don't show weakness, don't make direct eye contact unless addressed, and for God's sake, don't touch any of their weapons." Jack smiled tightly. "So basically, don't be myself." "Got it." The warriors parted as a much larger Kriltax emerged from the tower. Even among her species, Commander Vextra was imposing, nearly 10 feet tall, with an exoskeleton the color of dried blood and adorned with what appeared to be actual battle scars. The translator pinned to Jack's collar caught her first words. "Welcome, humans. I am Commander Vextra of the 7th Hive Legion. You stand in the presence of warriors who have bathed in the blood of 1,000 different species." Jack bit back his instinctive response, something about recommending soap instead, and bowed respectfully. Little did he know, this awkward first meeting was about to become much, much worse. The interior of the spire of negotiation looked like what would happen if H.R. Giger designed a corporate boardroom. Chitmas formations served as chairs around a massive table carved from what Jack desperately hoped wasn't an actual skeleton. "Please, seat yourselves." Commander Vextra gestured with one of her forearms. Her mandibles clicked in what the cultural briefing had described as formal politeness, but looked suspiciously like contemplating what you might taste like. Jack and Lisa took their seats across from 6 high-ranking Kriltax warriors. Each wore elaborate armor adorned with trophies that Jack tried very hard not to identify. "We shall begin with the traditional exchange of threats," Vextra announced, her multifaceted eyes gleaming. "I will go first. May your bloodline wither like vegetation in the red season should these negotiations prove false." Lisa nudged Jack. "Right. This was his job. May your exoskeleton crack and expose your soft parts to predators, if deception taints your words." Jack improvised, immediately wincing at his delivery. A tense silence fell over the room. Then unexpectedly, Commander Vextra made a harsh rattling sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. The human understands our ways better than expected, though your threat lacks elegance. Jack relaxed slightly. I'm better at understanding your culture than participating in it, Commander. The preliminary formalities continued for nearly an hour, ritual insults, ancestral boasts, and ceremonial posturing that made Jack's theatrical uncle at Thanksgiving dinner seem subtle by comparison. Finally, they reached the actual negotiations. Lisa smoothly outlined Earth's proposal: technological exchange for access to Krilltax mining rights on their outer moons. Commander Vextra listened, occasionally interjecting with questions that revealed a sharp intelligence behind the warrior facade. Jack found himself revising his initial dismissal of her as a simple-minded warmonger. She was calculating, strategic, and entirely focused on her people's advantage. Everything was going surprisingly well until one of the junior warriors, a twitchy specimen Jack had mentally nicknamed Stabby, made a dismissive gesture during Lisa's presentation. The humans offer trinkets in exchange for resources that have sustained our war machine for generations, Stabby chittered. Their species barely managed spaceflight while we had already conquered 3 solar systems. Jack felt his diplomatic restraint slipping. Actually, we were exploring the scientific mysteries of the universe while your ancestors were still figuring out how to sharpen sticks. Different priorities, I guess. The room went deadly quiet. You speak with unusual boldness for a species so soft, Commander Vextra said, her voice dangerously calm. We make up for it with unusual intelligence, Jack replied, before Lisa could stop him. Vextra's mandibles clacked rapidly, the Krilltax equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Intelligence without strength is merely the cunning of prey, and strength without intelligence is just a big target, Jack countered. A series of hisses erupted from the Krilltax side of the table. Lisa was now frantically signaling for Jack to shut up, but he was on a roll. Look, we could trade insults about evolutionary paths all day. The fact is, humans have something you want, and you have something we want. The intelligent approach would be cooperation rather than posturing. Commander Vextra rose to her full height, towering over the table. In one fluid motion she reached to the wall behind her, and pulled free an ornate ceremonial spear. The other Krilltax warriors backed away, creating space around the table. Perhaps a demonstration is required to remind the humans of their place in the galactic hierarchy, she said, her translator struggling to convey the menace in her tone. She raised the spear, its metal tip gleaming under the bioluminescent lights. Lisa had gone pale. The other Krilltax watched with what Jack could only interpret as bloodthirsty anticipation. This is the Spear of Ancestral Judgment, Vextra announced. For 12,000 cycles it has tested the worth of those who would treat with the Krilltax. Jack stood slowly, hands raised in what he hoped was a universal gesture of please don't impale me. Commander, I spoke out of turn, there's no need for, with lightning speed that belied her size, Vextra hurled the spear directly at Jack's chest. Time seemed to slow. Jack saw the spear rotating in flight, its trajectory perfect. His brain calculated that diving left or right would still result in a nasty impalement. In pure instinct, the kind that had once helped him win a regional baseball championship in high school, Jack's hand shot out and caught the spear, one-handed. 6 inches from his sternum, the room froze in collective shock. Jack stood there, spear in hand, looking just as surprised as everyone else. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then every Krilltax in the room dropped to one knee, including Commander Vextra herself. What just happened? Jack whispered to Lisa, who looked like she might faint. Before she could answer, Commander Vextra rose and approached Jack with ceremonial slowness. She stopped directly in front of him, her alien features unreadable. The human has caught my spear, she announced in a formal tone that seemed specifically designed for historic pronouncements. By the ancient law of Krilt, written in the blood of the first hive, and binding upon all who bear our genetics, he is now my eternal mate. Jack's grip on the spear faltered. I'm your what now? The next 2 hours were a blur of chittering Krilltax, frantic calls to Earth, and Jack repeatedly saying this can't be legal to anyone who would listen. They had been moved to a ceremonial preparation chamber, which was essentially an elaborate waiting room with too many weapons on the walls and suspicious stains on the floor. Lisa paced frantically while communicating with Earth Command through her secure tablet. Jack sat on what he hoped was a chair, and not some obscure torture device, still holding the ceremonial spear because no one had told him he could put it down. "Will someone please explain to me what exactly is happening?" Jack finally demanded. Lisa looked up from her tablet, her expression a mixture of disbelief and exasperation. "You've triggered something called the ritual of claimed combat mates. It's deeply embedded in Kriltak's law, so deeply that it predates their written history. And nobody thought to put this in my briefing. By the way, don't catch any flying objects or you might end up married." "It wasn't in the briefing because it's never happened before," Lisa hissed. "The spear isn't supposed to be catchable by non-Kriltaks. Their warriors train for decades to develop the reflex and strength needed to catch a thrown weapon. No human should have been able to do what you just did." Jack looked down at the spear in his hands. "So this is basically the Kriltak's version of Excalibur, and I just pulled the sword from the stone." "More like you just pulled the sword and now you're married to the stone," Lisa replied dryly. "Earth Command is in contact with the Galactic Alliance legal team, but it doesn't look good. The Kriltaks take their ancient laws very seriously." Before Jack could respond, the doors to the chamber swung open with dramatic timing. Commander Vextra entered, now wearing even more elaborate armor adorned with what Jack could only describe as too many spikes. Behind her followed an ancient Kriltax, its exoskeleton faded to a pale gray, leaning on a staff made from what appeared to be a vertebral column. "This is Elder Krontak, Keeper of Ancient Laws," Vextra announced. Her voice through the translator sounded strained, suggesting she was no happier about this situation than Jack was. The elder shuffled forward, multifaceted eyes studying Jack with unnerving intensity. "In 12,000 cycles, no off-worlder has caught the spear of ancestral judgment," he creaked, his translator rendering his voice like old parchment being crumpled. "Many have tried, most have died. Your reflexes are unexpected." "Thanks," Jack said, unsure if this was a compliment or an accusation. "Look, there has to be some misunderstanding. I'm sure your laws weren't designed with humans in mind." The elder made a dismissive gesture with one gnarled limb. "The law of Krilt transcends species. It is written, when a warrior casts their spear in challenge and the challenged catches it true, their life essence becomes entwined beyond death itself." Jack glanced at Lisa, who was frantically taking notes. "That sounds more like poetry than legal code." "To the Kriltaks, they are one and the same," Elder Krontak replied. Commander Vextra cast her challenge. "You accepted by catching the spear, rather than evading or perishing. The bond is formed." Vextra stepped forward, her mandibles tight against her face in what Jack was beginning to recognize as discomfort. "I did not intend a life bond challenge," she said stiffly. "I meant only to demonstrate Kriltak's superiority." "Yet you chose the spear of ancestral judgment," the elder countered. "Not a training spear, or a lesser weapon. The ancestors guided your choice, Commander." Jack raised his hand like a schoolboy. "Can I vote for a do-over? I'll let you throw another spear at me, and I promise to duck this time." The elder's chittering took several seconds for the translator to process. Apparently, Jack had just told a joke so blasphemous, it didn't have an equivalent in human language. "The law of Krilt cannot be undone," the elder finally said. "You are now bound to Commander Vextra as her combat mate. You will share dwelling, battle, and bloodline until the final molting claims you both." "Bloodline," Jack squeaked. Lisa stepped in, her diplomat training finally kicking in. "Elder Krontak, Commander Vextra, surely there must be precedents for handling such unusual circumstances. Our species are not biologically compatible for bloodline continuation." The elder seemed to consider this. "There have been interspecies bondings before, though rare. The ritual accommodates physical incompatibility. The essence of the law is shared destiny, not reproduction." "Shared destiny sounds significantly better than shared reproduction," Jack muttered. Commander Vextra clicked her mandibles in what might have been agreement. "I have duties to my warriors and my hive cluster. I cannot be bound to an off-worlder, especially one so fragile." "Hey," Jack protested. "I caught your spear, didn't I?" Vextra's multifaceted eyes narrowed. "A fortunate accident, or impressive skill," Jack countered, surprised by his own defensiveness. The elder observed their exchange with apparent interest. "The combat bond is already forming. You challenge each other as true warriors." "We're arguing, not bonding," Jack clarified. "For the Kriltaks, there is little difference," the elder replied with what might have been amusement. Lisa intervened again. "What exactly does this combat mate status entail, practically speaking?" The elder settled onto his haunches. The bonded pair must dwell together for one full lunar cycle. They must share sustenance, combat training, and strategic counsel. At the cycle's end, if both survive, the bond is permanently sealed. If both survive, Jack repeated. That doesn't sound promising. Combat bondings are often contested by other potential mates, the elder explained. It is tradition. Jack closed his eyes and took a deep breath. So not only am I accidentally married to an alien warrior who could snap me like a twig, but now other aliens might try to kill me for the privilege. A succinct summary, the elder confirmed. Jack looked at Vextra, who stood rigid and clearly uncomfortable. Despite her earlier attempt to skewer him, he felt a twinge of sympathy. She was as trapped by this situation as he was. What if I formally release Commander Vextra from this obligation? Jack asked. Surely there must be some provision for that. The elder's antenna twitched. You would surrender your claim to a superior warrior. Jack nodded. Absolutely. No offense to the commander, but I prefer my relationships to start with dinner, not death threats. A murmur ran through the Krilltax attendants, who had gathered at the doorway. The elder's mandibles worked silently for a moment. Such a surrender has no precedent, he finally said. It would require consideration by the Council of Elders. Until then, the law of Krilt stands. You are combat mates. Lisa looked up from her tablet with newfound hope. So there is a possibility of annulment, perhaps the elder conceded. But until the council convenes, which may take several cycles, the bonded pair must honor tradition. Commander Vextra will introduce her combat mate to her dwelling hive immediately. Vextra's posture suggested she'd rather introduce Jack to the business end of another spear, but she gave a curt nod. I will comply with the law of Krilt, she said formally, until the elders determine an alternative. Jack hesitantly offered the ceremonial spear back to her. Does this mean we're going to be roommates? Vextra took the spear, her clawed hand briefly touching Jack's. A strange electric sensation passed between them, which Jack attributed to either alien biology or extreme stress. We will be combat mates, she corrected him. And may the ancestors grant us swift release from this burden. Amen to that, Jack agreed, wondering how exactly he was going to explain this to his parents back on Earth. As they left the chamber, Lisa pulled him aside for one final warning. Whatever you do, don't eat anything blue, don't sleep more than 4 hours at a time, and for God's sake, don't try to consummate this marriage. Jack stared at her in horror. Why would I even just covering all the bases? Lisa said grimly. Earth can't afford an interstellar incident, or whatever the diplomatic term is for human diplomat accidentally marries alien commander, and then makes it worse. With that comforting thought, Jack followed his new alien combat mate into what promised to be the most awkward domestic arrangement in human history. Commander Vextra's dwelling hive turned out to be a massive multi-level structure carved into the side of a crystalline mountain. As they approached in a Krilltax transport vessel, essentially a flying tank with unnecessary spikes, Jack stared at the gleaming edifice with increasing dread. That's your house? He asked, breaking the tense silence that had persisted since they left the Spire of Negotiation. It is the ancestral dwelling of the 7th Hive Legion commanders, Vextra corrected. 22 generations of my genetic line have lived and died within its walls. Cozy, Jack muttered. Do you have a guest room, or will I be sleeping in the dungeon? Vextra's translator seemed to struggle with the question. There is no designated prisoner holding area. You will occupy the combat mate quarters, as tradition dictates. Of course there's a traditional combat mate bedroom, Jack sighed. Do Krilltax ever do anything without invoking thousand-year-old customs? Innovation is for technology, Vextra replied with surprising frankness. Tradition is for society. This balance has kept our species thriving while empires around us crumbled. Jack found himself without a sarcastic comeback, struck by the unexpected depth of her response. The transport landed on a jutting platform, where a line of Krilltax in elaborate household armor awaited them. As Jack and Vextra disembarked, the assembled aliens dropped to one knee in perfect unison. Your household staff? Jack asked. My personal combat unit, Vextra corrected. Every commander maintains warriors ready for battle at all times. She addressed the kneeling warriors in her native language, the clicks and hisses too complex for Jack's translator to process. When she finished, they rose and regarded Jack with what he could only interpret as alien curiosity. I have informed them of our situation, Vextra explained. They will respect your position as my combat mate, though they find it difficult to understand how a human could catch the ancestral spear. That makes 2 of us, Jack said. I played baseball in college, but this is definitely outside my league. Vextra led him into the dwelling hive, a disorienting maze of angular corridors and open chambers that seemed designed for beings with very different spatial concepts than humans. The architecture favored sharp angles and abrupt changes in ceiling height that Jack assumed made sense if you had compound eyes and could climb walls. "This will be your resting chamber," Vextra announced, gesturing to a surprisingly spacious room. The furnishings were sparse by human standards, a platform that might be a bed, various weapons displayed on the walls, and strange crystalline formations that cast prismatic light patterns across the floor. "No offense, but your interior decorator seems to have a concerning fixation on sharp objects," Jack observed, noting the numerous bladed weapons adorning the walls. "These are the ritual weapons of past combat mates," Vextra explained. Each chose their preferred instrument for the challenge. Jack's stomach dropped. "The challenge? Yes, it is inevitable that my status will be contested. As my combat mate, you will be expected to defend our bonding against challengers. With these," Jack gestured to the wall of medieval-looking death implements. "Traditionally, yes, though as an off-worlder, you may be granted certain accommodations." The way she said it made clear these accommodations would be considered deeply embarrassing. Jack sat down on the edge of the bed platform, which was surprisingly comfortable, despite looking like a slab of polished stone. "Commander, can we just acknowledge how absurd this situation is? You don't want to be bonded to me. I definitely don't want to be in a combat marriage with someone who tried to kill me a few hours ago. There has to be a way out of this that doesn't involve me fighting your ex-boyfriends." Vextra's mandibles clicked in what Jack was beginning to recognize as annoyance. "I have no former combat mates, and the challengers will not be seeking to bond with me, but to eliminate you to restore my availability status within the hierarchy. So they just want to kill me, not date you. That's marginally better, I guess." Vextra made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Rest. Acclimate to our atmosphere. A domestic unit will bring you sustenance suitable for human consumption." She turned to leave. "Wait," Jack called after her. "Where will you be?" "Consulting with my tactical advisors about this predicament." "You mean looking for loopholes in the combat mate law?" Vextra paused at the doorway. "Our objectives align in this matter, human. Neither of us wishes for this bonding to become permanent." With that, she left the door sealing behind her with an ominous click. Jack spent the next few hours exploring his new quarters and the adjoining chambers he was apparently allowed to access. The domestic unit, a smaller Krilltax with lighter coloration, brought him food that looked suspicious, but tasted surprisingly like spicy chicken soup. He carefully avoided anything blue, remembering Lisa's warning. As night fell, a spectacular affair with the two moons creating shifting patterns of light through the crystalline portions of the dwelling, Jack found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the alien city below. The view was breathtaking, a sprawling metropolis of organic-looking structures illuminated from within. "It is called Krillvaxtura," came Vextra's voice from behind him. "The gleaming hive of victory." Jack jumped slightly. "You move quietly for someone with an exoskeleton. A warrior's footsteps announce only what she wishes them to," Vextra replied, moving to stand beside him at the balcony's edge. She had removed her formal armor, wearing what must be the Krilltax equivalent of casual attire, still intimidating, but with fewer lethal-looking protrusions. "It's beautiful," Jack admitted, gesturing to the city. "Not what I expected from a warrior culture." "Because you assume warriors cannot appreciate beauty." There was a challenging edge to her voice. "No, because Earth's warrior cultures often prioritized function over aesthetics in their cities. Your architecture seems to embrace both." Vextra seemed surprised by his response. "You have studied more than just our battle poetry. I'm an anthropologist. Understanding cultures is literally my job." Jack turned to face her. "Which is why this situation is so frustrating. I should have known about this combat mate tradition. The ritual is rarely invoked, even among our own kind," Vextra admitted, "and never with off-worlders." They stood in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment, watching the alien moons. "My advisors found no precedent for breaking the bond before the lunar cycle completes," Vextra finally said, "but they continue to search our oldest archives. Meanwhile, we're stuck together," Jack sighed. "And apparently, I need to prepare for mortal combat with your admirer." "They are not admirers," Vextra corrected sharply. "They are warriors seeking to increase their status by challenging a commander's combat mate. Politics by other means." Jack nodded. "Some things are universal, I guess." Vextra tilted her head in a gesture Jack couldn't interpret. "You understand more than you should, human." "Jack, he said. If we're temporarily married by your laws, you might as well use my name. Jack, she repeated, the word sounding strange through her mandibles. It is inadequate. It carries no lineage, no battle honors. Maybe not, but it's mine. And given the circumstances, we should probably get to know each other beyond human and alien who tried to impale me. To his surprise, Vextra made that rattling sound again, laughter. You speak with unusual directness for a diplomat. I'm not actually a diplomat, Jack admitted. I'm just a linguistic anthropologist who wrote one paper on your culture, and somehow got roped into this mission. Perhaps that explains your unorthodox approach, Vextra said. Most diplomats we encounter are careful never to speak their true thoughts. Well, catching a spear with my face on the line tends to make me skip the pleasantries. Another rattling laugh. Indeed, she turned back to the view. Tomorrow we must begin combat training. The first challengers will arrive soon, drawn by the news of our unusual bonding. Can't we just explain that this is all a misunderstanding? To invoke the ancient law, and then dismiss it as error would be a grave insult to our traditions, Vextra explained. Either we find a legitimate exemption through the Council of Elders, or you must face the challenges. Jack ran a hand through his hair. And if I refuse to fight? Vextra's multifaceted eyes fixed on him with uncomfortable intensity. Then you will die, and I will be bound to your memory as one who chose an unworthy combat mate. My status, my command, my honor, all would be forfeit. So no pressure, Jack muttered. There is always pressure, Vextra said simply. That is what forges warriors. As the alien commander left him alone with his thoughts, Jack stared out at the glittering alien city, wondering how his life had taken such a bizarre turn. One minute he was a reluctant cultural consultant, the next he was caught in an accidental marriage with an alien warrior, and facing potential death matches. The strangest part? He was beginning to think Commander Vextra might not be as terrible as his first impression suggested. Terrifying, yes, alien in every sense of the word, absolutely. But beneath the warrior facade and cultural differences, he glimpsed something unexpected, a sharp intelligence and a dry humor not entirely unlike his own, which made the prospect of being challenged to mortal combat over her only slightly more absurd. Jack's combat training began at dawn, literally as the first rays of the alien sun breached the horizon. Vextra burst into his chamber with the subtlety of a freight train, clanging two metal objects together. Rise, combat mate. The day of preparation begins. Jack bolted upright, momentarily forgetting where he was. The sight of a 10-foot alien warrior looming over his bed was not the gentle awakening he'd hoped for. Has anyone ever told you that you'd make a terrible hotel concierge? He groaned, rubbing his eyes. I do not know this term, but I sense it is not a warrior's compliment, Vextra replied. She tossed something heavy onto the bed beside him. Your training armor. It has been adjusted for human proportions. Jack examined the offering skeptically. It resembled a cross between medieval plate armor and an insect's exoskeleton, with far too many articulated joints for his anatomy. I can't wear this. I don't even know how it goes on. The domestic units will assist you. You have 15 minutes to prepare. With that, she strode out, leaving Jack staring at the alien armor with mounting dread. 40 minutes and several embarrassing fitting attempts later, Jack stood in what appeared to be a training arena within the dwelling hive. The armor was surprisingly lightweight once properly attached, though it pinched in places he hadn't known could be pinched. Vextra circled him critically, making adjustments and chittering to herself. Your physiology presents challenges. Your limbs bend incorrectly, your torso is overlong, and you lack proper sensory appendages. Sorry for the inconvenience of my human body, Jack said dryly. If I'd known I'd be marrying an alien warrior, I'd have evolved differently. Your species' reliance on humor during stress is inefficient, Vextra noted, though her translator conveyed a hint of amusement. But perhaps it serves some psychological function. It keeps me from screaming in terror, which seems reasonably efficient. Jack rotated his shoulders, testing the armor's mobility. So what's the plan? Turn me into a Krilltax warrior in a week? Impossible, Vextra stated flatly. But we can exploit your differences. Exploit how? Rather than answer, Vextra moved to a weapon rack and selected a staff. Defend yourself, she said, and without further warning, lunged at him. Jack yelped, and stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding being swatted like a bug. What happened to starting with the basics? Combat is the only basic, Vextra replied, advancing again. Movement, reaction, survival. The next hour was a blur of dodging, falling, and occasionally, very occasionally, successfully parrying Vextra's attacks. By the end, Jack was drenched in sweat and sporting several impressive bruises despite the armor. You rely too much on your visual processing, Vextra observed as she allowed him a brief rest. A Krilltax warrior senses vibration through their feet, air disturbances through their antenna, and thermal variations through their carapace. That's great, but I'm working with human equipment here, Jack panted. 2 eyes, 2 ears and skin that bruises if you look at it wrong. Vextra made a dismissive gesture. Your species compensates with unusual adaptability, and that lump of neural tissue you overvalue. My brain? Yes, I'm somewhat attached to it. Then use it, she said, tossing him a different weapon, lighter, with a curved blade at one end. Your physiology has limitations, but also advantages. You move differently than a Krilltax. Your joints have unusual flexibility. Your center of gravity is unique. Jack examined the weapon thoughtfully. So instead of trying to fight like a Krilltax, fight like a human, Vextra finished. A strategy no challenger will anticipate. Over the next 3 days, their training evolved. Rather than forcing Krilltax combat techniques on him, Vextra began studying how Jack moved naturally and adapting the training accordingly. She brought in specialists, weapons masters, movement experts, even what appeared to be a Krilltax doctor who examined Jack with disturbing thoroughness. Your calcium-based endoskeleton has surprising tensile strength, the doctor noted, prodding Jack's arm with a chitinous appendage. And your muscular system, while inefficient, allows for explosive bursts of force. Thanks, I think. By the 4th day, Jack was beginning to develop something resembling skill with the curved blade, which Vextra called a krillvash, or quick cutter. It suited his human mobility, allowing him to use speed and unexpected angles rather than brute force. Even more surprisingly, he found himself enjoying Vextra's company. Between training sessions, they exchanged information about their respective cultures. Jack taught her about Earth's diverse combat traditions, from Japanese sword techniques to Brazilian capoeira. Vextra explained the complex hierarchical structure of Krilltax society and the historical evolution of their battle tactics. Your species' diversity of combat approaches is impressive, she admitted after Jack demonstrated a basic judo throw. We have always evolved our techniques internally. Cultural exchange can be a powerful source of innovation, Jack said. Even for traditions, Vextra seemed to consider this as she helped him up from the training mat. Perhaps this is why the ancestors arranged our combat bonding. To introduce new approaches, Jack raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting this whole spear-catching fiasco might have a purpose? All combat serves purpose, Vextra replied cryptically. Their unexpected rapport was interrupted that evening by the arrival of a formal communication from the Council of Elders. Jack was in his quarters, soaking his aching muscles in what the domestic unit had assured him was a healing bath, though it smelled suspiciously like licorice, when Vextra entered without announcement. The council has reached a preliminary decision, she said without preamble. Jack sat up straighter, splashing the licorice water, and, they acknowledge the unprecedented nature of our bonding, but find insufficient grounds for immediate dissolution. Vextra's mandibles clicked in obvious frustration. They request a demonstration of the bond's validity through the traditional means, which is, surviving a formal challenge. Vextra's multifaceted eyes fixed on Jack. A challenger has already come forward. The combat will take place tomorrow at high sun. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. Tomorrow, but I'm nowhere near ready, hence the challenger's eagerness, Vextra noted grimly. Kravenok is an ambitious warrior from a rival legion. He seeks to advance by claiming my availability. By killing me, Jack clarified. Yes, Jack sank deeper into the licorice bath. Well, it's been a short but interesting life. You will not die, Vextra stated with surprising conviction. Your confidence is touching, but I've had 4 days of training against someone with presumably a lifetime of experience. Vextra moved closer, lowering her voice though no one else was present. Kravenok is skilled but predictable. His combat patterns follow classical forms without innovation, and he has one significant weakness, which is arrogance. Vextra's mandibles spread and what Jack had learned was a Krilltax smile, disconcerting but genuine. He believes his victory is assured simply because you are human. This gives us advantage. Jack noticed her use of us with surprise. You really don't want me to die, do you? Your death would be inconvenient, Vextra replied, though her body language suggested more complex emotions than her words admitted. High praise indeed, Jack said with a wry smile. So what's our strategy? They spent the night planning. Vextra brought recordings of Kravenok's previous challenges, analyzing his movements, preferred attacks, and response patterns. Jack absorbed as much as he could, looking for exploitable weaknesses while Vextra adjusted his armor for maximum protection. The challenge follows strict protocols, she explained as she worked. 3 rounds of combat. Victory requires either submission or incapacitation. Death is permitted but not required. That's mildly reassuring. As dawn approached, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He stood on the same balcony, where he and Vextra had shared their first real conversation, watching the alien moon sink toward the horizon. Contemplating your existence, Vextra's voice came from behind him. Just the weird turns it takes, Jack replied without turning. A month ago, I was teaching undergraduate classes on cultural relativism. Now I'm preparing for ritual combat with an alien warrior over the honor of his commander, who happens to be my accidental wife. Combat mate, Vextra corrected automatically, moving to stand beside him. Though I understand the human term carries similar connotations. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sky lighten. I have something for you, Vextra said finally, extending one of her 4 arms. In her palm rested a small object, a polished stone pendant on a cord. It is traditional to give one's combat mate a token before their first challenge. Jack took it carefully. The stone seemed to shift colors as he turned it, catching the early light. It's beautiful. What does it mean? It contains fragments of my ancestor's carapace, Vextra explained. It symbolizes that you carry my lineage's strength into battle. That's simultaneously touching and slightly disturbing, Jack said, slipping the cord over his head nonetheless. Thank you. Vextra's mandibles clicked softly. In your culture, would this be an appropriate moment for a gesture of affection? Jack blinked in surprise. Possibly. Depends on the gesture. Without further explanation, Vextra extended her primary right arm, gently touching her claw to the center of Jack's chest, directly over his heart. The gesture was surprisingly intimate. Her usually fierce demeanor softened. May your heart pump maintain optimal rhythm during combat, she said formally, though her voice carried an undercurrent Jack hadn't heard before. Thanks, Jack replied, oddly touched. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever wished for my heart pump. A gong-like sound reverberated through the dwelling hive, signaling the approach of high sun. It is time, Vextra said, her warrior demeanor returning. Remember what I taught you. Do not fight like a Krilltax. Fight like Jack Miller. As they made their way to the ceremonial combat arena, a vast circular platform suspended between crystalline spires, Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. Sure, he was probably about to die in spectacular fashion, but somehow, knowing that Commander Vextra was actually rooting for him, made it slightly less terrifying. The arena was surrounded by hundreds of Krilltax spectators, their collective chittering, creating a sound like violent rainfall. At the far end stood Jack's opponent, Kravenok, a massive Krilltax warrior with jet-black exoskeleton adorned with red markings that Jack assumed signified either impressive victories or questionable fashion choices. As Jack took his position, the curved blade feeling suddenly inadequate in his hand, Elder Krontok's voice echoed across the arena. The challenge is presented. Kravenok of the 4th Battle Cluster challenges the combat bond of Commander Vextra and the human Jack Miller. The crowd's chittering intensified. May the worthy prevail and the ancestors witness. Jack glanced toward Vextra, who stood at the edge of the arena. She made a small gesture, touching her claw to her chest as she had done to him earlier. Despite everything, Jack felt himself smile. Then Kravenok charged, and the real challenge began. The first round of combat was mercifully brief, primarily because Jack spent most of it running away. Kravenok was faster than he appeared, his bulky exoskeleton concealing surprising agility. He charged across the arena with a battle cry that Jack's translator rendered as something about consuming Jack's soft tissues, which really didn't need translation to convey the general sentiment. Jack dove aside, rolling and coming up in a defensive stance just as Vextra had taught him. The crowd's chittering intensified as Kravenok pivoted and struck again, his weapon, a wicked-looking polearm with multiple bladed edges, whistling through the air where Jack's head had been a split second earlier. The human flees like prey, Kravenok announced to the crowd, mandibles spread wide in what Jack recognized as a dominance display. Is this what Commander Vextra chooses for a combat mate, a soft-bodied coward? Jack circled warily, keeping maximum distance between them. "Just getting to know your moves," he called back, his translator hopefully conveying confidence rather than terror. "Nice form, very traditional. Did you learn that in Kriltak's kindergarten?" The insult worked better than expected. Kravenok's antennae flattened against his carapace in rage, and he abandoned strategy for fury, charging directly at Jack with his polearm extended. This time, instead of dodging, Jack stepped into the charge at the last possible moment, ducking under the polearm and slashing upward with his curved blade. He felt it connect, skidding across Kravenok's armored midsection, but finding purchase at a joint, exactly where Vextra had told him the exoskeleton would be weakest. A hiss of greenish fluid sprayed from the wound as Jack rolled past, coming up behind his opponent. The crowd went momentarily silent, then erupted in a cacophony of clicks and chittering. "First blood to the human combat mate," Elder Krontak announced, sounding genuinely surprised. Kravenok turned slowly, his multifaceted eyes fixed on Jack with newfound respect and intensified hatred. "A fortunate strike, soft skin. Fortunate for me, unfortunate for your dry cleaning bill," Jack quipped, falling back into his defensive stance. The exchange had confirmed what Vextra suspected. Kravenok fought with technical perfection, but lacked adaptability. Against a traditional opponent, he would be formidable. Against a human improvising with 4 days of hybrid training, he was struggling to adjust. The gong sounded, ending the first round. Jack retreated to the edge of the arena, where Vextra waited, her mandibles tight against her face in what he now recognized as concentrated focus. "You perceive his weakness," she said. Not a question but an observation. Jack nodded, breathing hard. "He's fighting the opponent he expects, not the one he has." "A critical error in combat," Vextra agreed. She touched a cloth to a cut on Jack's arm he hadn't even noticed. "But he will adapt. The second round will be more difficult." She was right. When the gong sounded again, Kravenok emerged with a different stance, lower, more balanced, with his weapon held defensively rather than aggressively. He had switched tactics, no longer underestimating the human. This time, Kravenok circled patiently, making small probing attacks that forced Jack to constantly retreat and reposition. It was a war of attrition, designed to tire the human, while conserving the Kriltax's energy. Within minutes, Jack was breathing hard, his muscles burning from constant tension and movement. "Your species lacks endurance," Kravenok observed, his translator conveying smug satisfaction. "Your lungs heave while I have not yet engaged my secondary respiratory chambers." "We're just warming up," Jack panted, knowing he needed to change the dynamic. Running and reacting wasn't sustainable. He needed to force Kravenok out of his comfort zone again. Remembering their analysis of Kravenok's previous fights, Jack realized the warrior had never faced an opponent who willingly entered his strike zone. The Kriltak's combat style emphasized maintaining optimal distance for weapon effectiveness. What if he deliberately violated that principle? As Kravenok advanced with another precise textbook attack, Jack did the unexpected. He stepped forward into the attack rather than away from it, inside the effective range of the polearm. The move was so contrary to Kriltak's combat doctrine that Kravenok actually froze for a crucial half-second, his weapon suddenly useless at such close range. Jack rammed his shoulder into Kravenok's midsection, leveraging his lower center of gravity to upset the Kriltax's balance. As Kravenok staggered backward, Jack followed up with a series of quick strikes to the joints in his opponent's armor, not deep enough to cause serious damage, but precisely targeted to cause maximum discomfort and disorientation. The crowd erupted again, this time with a sound Jack couldn't interpret. He caught sight of Vextra at the arena's edge, her normally impassive features showing what might have been pride. But Jack's advantage was temporary. Kravenok recovered quickly, adapting to the human's unorthodox approach by switching to close-quarters combat techniques. What followed was a brutal exchange of blows, with Jack taking more than he gave. By the time the second gong sounded, both combatants were wounded, Kravenok leaking from several joint punctures, Jack sporting a collection of cuts, and what felt like at least one cracked rib. "You are injured," Vextra observed as Jack collapsed at the arena's edge, every breath a stab of pain. "Your talent for observation is remarkable," Jack wheezed. "Please tell me you have something for broken ribs in that medical kit." Vextra applied a cool gel to his side that immediately numbed the pain. "He has adapted more quickly than anticipated. The final round will require something unexpected." Jack nodded, an idea forming. I think I know what to do, but I'll need your help. Their hushed conference was interrupted by the final gong. Jack stood, wincing despite the numbing gel, and returned to the center of the arena. Kravenok looked confident now, sensing victory over his weakening opponent. Your movements slow, human, he called across the arena. Perhaps if you surrender now, I will allow you to keep some of your limbs as trophies. Actually, I was thinking we could talk this out, Jack replied, lowering his weapon slightly. This whole combat mate situation is a misunderstanding anyway. You don't really want to be bonded to Commander Vextra, do you? Kravenok's antenna twitched in confusion. The bond is not the objective. The victory is. Right, but why? To improve your status, impress your superiors. Jack circled slowly, keeping his stance deliberately loose. There are easier ways to get promoted. You mock our traditions, Kravenok hissed, advancing with renewed anger. Not mocking, questioning, Jack corrected, continuing to maintain distance while speaking conversationally. I've been studying your combat techniques. They're impressive, traditional, perfect in execution. But that's the problem, isn't it? Perfection without innovation leads to predictability. The taunt struck home. Kravenok charged, abandoning his careful approach for a direct attack, exactly as Jack had hoped. Instead of dodging or engaging, Jack threw his weapon directly at Kravenok's feet. The unexpected move caused the Kriltax warrior to instinctively step aside, directly into the path of a second weapon that arced through the air from the edge of the arena, where Vextra stood with her arm still extended from the throw. The blunted training spear struck Kravenok in the center of his carapace, not hard enough to seriously injure, but with perfect placement to hit the impact-sensitive receptor node that Vextra had identified as his weak point. Kravenok staggered, momentarily disoriented by the sensory overload. Jack didn't waste the opportunity. He closed the distance in 3 running steps, ducked under Kravenok's reflexive swing, and executed the move he and Vextra had secretly practiced, a human judo throw adapted for Kriltax physiology. Using Kravenok's own momentum, and leveraging his higher center of gravity, Jack sent the much larger warrior flying through the air. The impact when Kravenok hit the ground was impressive, the sound reverberating through the arena. Before the stunned Kriltax could recover, Jack was on him, pressing the recovered training spear against the vulnerable spot where his primary neural cluster was closest to the surface, the Kriltax equivalent of a throat. Yield, Jack said simply, pushing just hard enough to make his point. For a tense moment, it seemed Kravenok might refuse. Then, with a formal gesture that Jack recognized from his training, the Kriltax warrior extended his primary right arm, palm upward, the traditional sign of submission.
The human combat mate prevails, Elder Krontak announced, his translator barely keeping up with his excited chittering. The bond is validated by combat. The arena erupted in sound as Jack stepped back, offering a hand to help Kravenok up. The Kriltax warrior ignored it, rising with wounded dignity and offering a curt nod before limping from the arena. Vextra approached, her posture rigid with formal Kriltax propriety, though Jack thought he detected a gleam in her multifaceted eyes. You fought with unexpected skill, combat mate, she said for the benefit of the surrounding warriors. I had an excellent teacher, Jack replied, playing along with the formality despite feeling like he might collapse at any moment. Later, in the privacy of Vextra's strategy chamber, the pretense dropped. That was an unauthorized tactic, she said, applying healing gel to Jack's various wounds. My intervention could have been grounds for challenge and validation, but it wasn't, Jack noted. Because no one saw you throw the spear. The elder saw, Vextra corrected. He chose not to intervene. Jack winced as she touched a particularly painful cut. Why would he do that? Vextra was silent for a moment, her mandibles working thoughtfully. I believe I owe you an explanation, Jack Miller. About the spear of ancestral judgment. She set aside the medical supplies and faced him directly. It was not thrown in anger or challenge as you believed. Jack's eyes narrowed. What are you saying? The spear is a ceremonial object used in a very specific ritual, one I invoked deliberately during our first meeting. The implication dawned on Jack slowly. You wanted me to catch it. That's impossible. You couldn't have known I would. Correct. The expected outcome was that you would evade, demonstrating wisdom rather than combat skill. No human should have been able to catch it. Her mandibles clicked in what Jack now recognized as embarrassment. Your unexpected reflexes complicated matters. So this whole combat mate situation
was a calculated diplomatic strategy, Vextra finished. The ritual, when performed correctly, creates a formal alliance between different factions. By establishing you as an honorary member of my lineage, I could secure favorable terms for the treaty with Earth without appearing to capitulate to off-worlders. Jack stared at her, processing this revelation. You arranged for Kravenok to challenge me, didn't you? To create an opportunity to invalidate the combat bond on your terms. Vextra's antenna twitched, the Kriltax equivalent of a shrug. It seemed the most efficient solution. The challenge would end with your honorable defeat, the bond would be broken, and diplomatic relations could proceed normally. Except I won, Jack said slowly. An outcome I did not anticipate, Vextra admitted. Your species continues to surprise me, Jack Miller. Jack couldn't decide whether to be angry at the manipulation or impressed by the complex strategy. So what happens now? We're still combat bonded according to your laws. Yes, Vextra seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. Though there is a provision in the ancient texts for transforming a combat bond into a diplomatic alliance bond, it would satisfy our traditions while serving both our species' interests. And what would that entail, exactly? You would remain Earth's primary representative to the Kriltax, with special status as my associate. Her voice carried an unusual inflection the translator couldn't quite capture. It is not dissimilar to what humans call an ambassador, though with certain ceremonial obligations. Jack considered this, feeling a strange reluctance to simply end the unexpected connection that had formed between them. These ceremonial obligations, do they include more combats to the death with angry Kriltax warriors? Only on festival days, Vextra replied, and it took Jack a moment to realize she was making a joke. He laughed, wincing as his ribs protested. You know, when I signed up for this mission, the worst I expected was boring diplomatic dinners. Instead, I got an alien wife, trial by combat, and now apparently a permanent posting on a planet where everything is slightly trying to kill me. You regret catching the spear? Vextra asked, her tone suggesting the answer mattered more than she wanted to admit. Jack looked at her thoughtfully. Beyond the alien physiology and warrior exterior, he'd glimpsed an intelligence and complexity that intrigued him. Their forced proximity had revealed unexpected common ground, a shared appreciation for strategy, dry humor, and pragmatic problem-solving. Actually, he said finally, I think it might be the first good catch I've made since college baseball. Vextra's mandibles spread in that strange Kriltax smile. Then perhaps the ancestors guided your hand after all, or just dumb human luck, Jack suggested. There is a saying among my people, luck is merely the intersection of preparation and opportunity, viewed from insufficient perspective. That's surprisingly philosophical for a warrior culture. We contain multitudes, Jack Miller, Vextra replied. As I am learning, do humans. As the alien sun set on his first victory as a combat mate, Jack Miller, anthropologist, accidental diplomat, and now apparently permanent alien ambassador, found himself looking forward to the cultural misunderstandings yet to come. After all, he'd already survived the worst first date in human history. Everything else would be a breeze by comparison. Well, except for explaining to Earth Command how he'd accidentally become permanently diplomatically married to an alien commander. That conversation would definitely require some creative anthropological framing, and possibly another round of combat. Just to be safe,